The salmon fillet in your supermarket right now, the one under plastic wrap, priced at $12 or $14 a pound, has a strong chance of coming from a single country, Norway. Not caught wild, raised in a steel net pen in a fjord by one of a handful of companies that together control a large share of the world's farmed Atlantic salmon supply. Two families sit at the center of that. And most people who eat salmon every week have never heard either name. This is Hungry Empire. What you're about to see is how a handful of Norwegian entrepreneurs looked at their country's cold fjords and built one of the most concentrated food empires on Earth, measured not in land but in water, not in acres but in fish, worth somewhere around $30 billion a year. By the end of this, the price tag on that fillet will never look quite the same. 40 years ago, salmon was a luxury, a genuinely rare item. If you ate it in the 1980s, you paid for it. And chances are it was wild-caught Pacific salmon, not Atlantic. Atlantic salmon, the species that now dominates every sushi counter and grocery aisle from Seoul to São Paulo, was barely a commercial product. Wild stocks in the North Atlantic had been declining for decades. The fish existed. The demand wasn't there yet, and the technology to raise it at scale simply didn't exist. What changed that is one of the stranger industrial stories of the 20th century. Norwegian fish farmers in the 1970s and early 1980s began experimenting with net pens anchored in sheltered fjords along the country's western coast. The water was cold, clean, and deep. The geography was almost purpose-built. Thousands of kilometers of sheltered coastline, protected from the open North Sea, with consistent year-round temperatures that salmon thrive in. Early operations were small, family farms raising a few thousand fish at a time. The obstacle in those early years was disease. Salmon packed into pens at density are vulnerable to pathogens that spread fast. In the late 1980s, infectious salmon anemia, ICE, devastated Norwegian farms. Hundreds of operations went under. The entire industry nearly collapsed before it had properly started. What saved it was a combination of vaccines developed by Norwegian researchers and a brutal consolidation. The farms that survived began absorbing the ones that didn't. The industry that came out of that crisis was leaner, more professional, and far more concentrated than the one that had entered it. Here's what's most surprising about what happened next. The consolidation didn't slow down. It accelerated. Through the 1990s and into the 2000s, the Norwegian salmon industry restructured around a small number of increasingly large producers. Licenses to farm salmon in Norwegian waters are controlled by the government and deliberately limited in number. Norway has never issued them freely. That scarcity became a structural moat. The companies that held licenses got bigger. The ones that didn't couldn't compete. By the time the 21st century was underway, two names had risen above all others. Mowi, originally Marine Harvest, rebranded in 2019, is one of the largest salmon farming companies in the world. It is controlled through a trust called Geveren, tied to the Møgster family of Western Norway. Mowi operates across Norway, Scotland, Canada, Chile, and the Faroe Islands. In a recent year, by recent estimates, it harvested roughly 500,000 tons of salmon globally, around a fifth of all farmed Atlantic salmon produced anywhere on Earth. The second name is SalMar. SalMar was founded by Gustav Witzøe in 1991 and has remained a family operation. Gustav's son, Gustav Magnar Witzøe, now in his early 30s, inherited a stake that made him one of the youngest billionaires in Norway's history. SalMar's market capitalization has, by recent estimates, ranged in the high single-digit to low double-digit billions of US dollars. Together with Mowi and a small cluster of other Norwegian producers, Lerøy Seafood, Cermaq, Norwegian companies account for a large share of farmed Atlantic salmon sold on world markets, by some estimates more than half, according to data from the Norwegian Seafood Council. Put yourself in the position of a supermarket buyer in Tokyo or London. You need fresh Atlantic salmon, consistently, year-round, at a quality your customers expect. Your options are limited. Chile is the world's second-largest producer, with roughly a fifth to a quarter of global output by recent estimates. But Chilean farms have faced recurring disease outbreaks, and logistics from South America add time and cost. Canada produces some. The Faroe Islands produce some. But Norwegian salmon, refrigerated and air-freighted, can land on a Tokyo shelf within 48 hours of harvest. That speed, that consistency, that scale, that's why Norway dominates. The infrastructure behind it is extraordinary. A single modern Norwegian net pen is a circular steel structure up to 160 meters in diameter, holding up to 200,000 fish. Feed is delivered by automated boats that anchor alongside and pipe pellets directly into the pen. Underwater drones and cameras monitor fish behavior around the clock, adjusting feeding rates in real time. Well boats, specialized vessels, transport live fish from pen to slaughterhouse without ever removing them from water, minimizing stress and preserving flesh quality. A salmon that enters a pen as a smolt grows for roughly 14 to 22 months before harvest. The entire cycle, from egg to vacuum-packed fillet, is industrialized to a degree that would have seemed implausible to the fish farmers of the 1970s. And then the price. Of every dollar you spend on a Norwegian salmon fillet at a Western supermarket, the farming company captures perhaps 30 to 40 cents in revenue. After feed costs, which alone represent roughly 50% of the cost of production. Feed, primarily composed of fish meal and fish oil sourced from smaller pelagic species like anchovies, is the single largest input cost in the industry. The retailer keeps somewhere between 30 and 40% of the shelf price as margin. Processing, logistics, and air freight account for most of the rest. The farmer, at the farm gate, works on margins that look comfortable in good years and punishing in bad ones. The problems with this empire are real and documented. Sea lice, parasites that attach to fish and damage skin and gills, are the industry's chronic problem. Norwegian farms spent an estimated 1 billion euros managing sea lice in a single recent year, according to the Norwegian Institute of Marine Research. The treatments used have environmental consequences. Some chemical treatments affect non-target crustaceans in surrounding waters. Escaped farmed salmon interbreed with wild Atlantic salmon and reduce genetic diversity, something Norwegian environmental regulators have flagged as a serious long-term concern. Wild Atlantic salmon stocks in Norwegian rivers have declined sharply over the same decades that farming expanded. The precise connection is disputed. The existence of a connection is not. Here's the take that will probably get some pushback. The Norwegian government's system of limited licenses, designed partly to protect the environment by controlling expansion, has concentrated wealth and market power in a way that no regulator seems entirely comfortable with. But nobody has seriously moved to change it. The licenses are worth enormous sums. A single license to farm salmon in Norwegian waters has sold for the equivalent of millions of euros. The barrier to entry is so high that new competition from within Norway is essentially impossible. The empire is, structurally, self-reinforcing. What this tells us about modern food systems is worth sitting with. The most consumed premium seafood on the planet, a fish that went from rare luxury to middle-class staple in a single generation, is controlled by a small number of family trusts in one northern European country. That's not an accident. It's the product of geography, government policy, industrial innovation, and several decades of consolidation. The question worth asking is whether that concentration serves you, the consumer, or primarily serves the families whose names are on the trusts. In 2023, salmon prices in global markets swung, by some estimates, by more than 40% within a single year, driven by Norwegian production volumes, disease outbreaks, and currency movements. Norwegian salmon farmers had record revenue. Consumers in Japan and the United States paid more for their sushi. The price of your salmon fillet is set, in substantial part, in fjords you have never visited, by companies you have likely never heard of, whose controlling families built their wealth from one fish over 40 years. The next time you see that fillet in the case, $12, $14, maybe more. That is the empire you are looking at. Every food on your plate has a story like this behind it. A small number of hands, a quiet corner of the world, a chain of decisions made decades ago that runs straight to your kitchen. We are going to keep pulling on those threads. Tell us in the comments, which food empire should we expose next? Your answers decide where we go. Follow Hungry Empire and watch the map redraw.